So first session is for just transition, people and politics. So what else, right? And online, we will at some point have 2 participants from Germany. I seen Gülcan Nitsch earlier joining. I don't know if she's on, is she on there right now? Gülcan? Probably not. Yes, she's here, great. And I don't see Miranda yet, but maybe she'll come later, or we'll just start anyway. So I'll introduce you very briefly. I mean, Gülcan, thank you for joining us. I hope you can hear us. And let's see if we can hear you.
Yes.
Not yet.
Hello.
So, Gülcan, I don't know if you're muted. Maybe you're muted, or it might be on our end. We'll figure it out. So Gülcan Nitsch is a founder of and director of Jesil Chamber. I hope I say this somewhat right. It's a Turkish-German environmental group active specifically in the immigrant community in Germany. And you'll tell us more about that in a minute, but thank you so much for joining us. And also for being flexible with the time. I know it's already a little later in Germany, but not super late. And here in the room, we are joined by Shaina Oliver with Moms Clean Air Force, an Indigenous rights advocate, and also a mother in Denver, Colorado, and yeah, very active there, but also for Indigenous rights in the whole region. So you can tell us more about that in a minute too. And then Vernon Walker, thank you for joining us from Massachusetts, from Cambridge, Massachusetts. And you have multiple hats too. One is with clean water, and then the other one where you work on climate justice for clean water action. And then you're also, we can see this, you're running for office as we speak for city council. And Sharon mentioned before how important these local actually making a difference. So of course, Sharon also referred to the governor several times, but she also referred to the city council or to the local council that you're trying to get in there. So we wanted to talk here about your different experiences, your work, but we also want to have a conversation if possible. And if and when Miranda Schroyers joins, that will be great. She can just come in. Miranda Schroyers is an American, being a professor at the Technical University in Munich in the political sciences or School of Political Sciences. And her focus is on the role of civil society in the energy transition. So whenever she comes, she can contribute on these aspects. But let's start here, and let's start with Gülcan. I hope we can hear you now. So we wanted to, or I wanted to ask you how you started, how you got to start your work, what made you take this leap, because that didn't exist before. And then also how you evolved, basically, if there are like several stages where you came from where you started to where you are today. And what this also maybe has in terms of lessons that you want to share with us here in the room. And thank you.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. I wish all participants an exciting and inspiring time here at this conference. Yes, the climate crisis is the most pressing issue and the most important task of the coming years. We all...
So, not sure.
Can you hear me?
We lost you for a second.
Okay.
So
can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, thank you.
Okay. Should I start again?
Oh,
Okay.
you can start again. Yes, please.
Okay. I have a microphone. Okay. I would like to report here on my many years of experience. Yes, I founded Yeşil Çember. It means the green circle 17 years ago. And we have been raising awareness of environmental and climate protection among migrant communities in Germany. To do this, we have developed completely new ways, new communication formats, and new partnerships, because the migrant communities need a special approach. And it is not just a question of language, for example, whether it's German or Turkish. It's important that the services are low threshold and in easy language, and that people are picked up where they are. That is extremely important, but people's concern also plays an important role. What does a migrant family with many children who has completely different concerns have to do with the topic of climate change? How can we make a direct connection here? And how can we empower people to become active themselves? We very soon developed multiplier training courses, because we noticed that the German environmental conservation associations were not offering anything for these migrant communities. 17 years ago, there was really nothing nationwide in this regard. That was a gap that I saw at that time. That is why I set out to fill this gap to some extent and to address people's concerns and the reality of their lives with such low threshold services. Yes, what are people interested in? What could be the motivation for people to become active, to take responsibility for environmental and climate protection? Of course, we have discussed all these questions with people over the years, and I have traveled all over Germany. I have trained hundreds of people who then became active as multipliers in their own neighborhood after the training and passed on what they had learned. The central question is always, how can people reduce their carbon footprint? And how can they do this through their everyday behavior? We empower people. We give people tools to make these sustainable decisions easier. One important aspect in this context is the many seals. I don't know how it is in US, but in Germany, we have a lot of seals on products. It is virtually a seal jungle that a normal citizen cannot even keep track of. We teach people to recognize the most important seals. At this point, I would also like to address the gender role. All the services are, of course, open to all migrant people, but most of those who come to us are women. For the 17 years we have been in existence, it has been the case that 80 to 90% of the people who reach with our services are women. So the issue is also gendered, and not just in migrant communities. It is especially the women who have families, who have children, who feel responsible for the children's health, who can and want to make contribution contribution to society. I would like to briefly present a typical family. These are people with difficult housing situations, who have little money, who have a low level of education. And these are people who live in noisier neighborhoods and are much more exposed to pollutions. That is where the issue of environmental justice starts for me. Depending on the level of education, depending on social status, a family can either afford a good life or a less good life. And if I have little money, that of course influence my purchasing decisions. At least here in Germany, it's the case, I don't know how it is in the US, that organic products are more expensive than conventional ones. This, of course, presents a hurdle. Why is it that the healthier food is more expensive than the conventional food, which is quite often contaminated with pesticides, which contain substances that are harmful to health? These are questions that are of great concern to the migrant communities. We have tried to address the issue of climate protection holistically. In other words, from the perspective of justice, health, social issues, and the question of how people can contribute to climate protection with their personal commitment. After all, this is a task for society as a whole. Climate change has been around for a long time. The situation is extremely serious. And in this situation, we simply have to reach out to all people. We need to get everyone on board. Everyone is a citizen and everyone can be a change maker. Everyone can take responsibility, and together, hand in hand, we can ensure that the behaviors that are harmful to the climate simply gradually become less and disappear. Ideally, climate damaging products should be banned by law. In Germany, however, we are unfortunately very far away from this. A great number of harmful products are sold, and just a few days ago, the European Parliament extended the approval of the pesticide glyphosate by 10 years. This means that farmers will be allowed to use it for another 10 years. Even so, it is very harmful to health and has been proven to cause cancer. These are the kinds of issues that keep people concerned. I founded my organization, Yeşil Çember, under the umbrella of a German environmental organization. This is the German section of Friends of the Earth. This was something quite new. To start an initiative within a German environmental organization to sensitize migrant people to the issue was a major contribution to participation. I was under the umbrella of Friends of the Earth for the first 5 years. Then I went into business for myself and started a social enterprise. I now have several employees and many volunteers. The need is really enormous. We had started 70 years ago with a focus on the Turkish community. However, in the last 5 years, that has expanded. We now address not only the Turkish community, but also the other migrant communities, depending on where the need is. If civil society approaches us and says, can you show us, then we will do it. In conclusion, I would like to say that I would like to see a stronger sense of we in society. If we really want justice, if we really want to overcome to some extent the huge challenge to humanity that climate change represents, then it is essential that we create a real sense of we in society. The important thing here is for cultures to live together peacefully and to tackle this together. This is a task for society as a whole. The political framework would also have to improve. We have a pretty strong civil society in Germany. I would like to see politicians cooperate better here, show a clear will to change things, and also develop common visions. What kind of future do we want to live in? And what kind of future do we want to live to our children? These are precisely the questions that are also of great concern to the migrant communities in Germany. I would like to see more intercultural exchange and more synergies. Finally, a quote from Helda Pescher-Kammerer. If one dreams alone, it is only a dream. When many dream together,
I think the quote broke up, so maybe you can read it again. We only got the very first words.
Okay. Finally, a quote from Helda Pescher-Kammerer. If one dreams alone, it is only a dream. When many dream together, it is the beginning of a new reality. In this sense, thank you so much.
Wonderful.
And I wish you a good, inspiring event. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gülcan. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. And I hope it was also interesting for our other panelists here in the room. So feel free to react also to what Gülcan was talking about, the specific situation she talked about, maybe how it's different in the US or not different. I mean, she talked about the special situation of immigrant communities, but also just about general challenges of, you know, how things are priced, or people may be being priced out of things they actually want to participate in. They may want to be eating healthy food or breathing clean air. We talked about this, but they cannot afford it. So I want to start or go next to Shaina and of course hear from you a little bit more, both about your specific situation in regard to what Gülcan was referring to, but also very specifically because you are living in a state that is also a fossil fuel producer, especially natural gas. And so my specific question to you, also with this link to air quality and of course, environmental justice there, is whether there is, and Gülcan mentioned this, vision of the future. Is there a vision of the future with natural gas? In your view, can this be transformed? Is there a path where you can see this on the same picture or in the same picture or not? So, Shaina.
Yes, there we go. I want to thank you for inviting me and hearing me out. A few years ago, we did a presentation, and I am a Native American tribal affiliate of the Navajo Nation. And a lot of these things are personal to me because the fact that, there was a time that the policy had the Indian Removal Act, and that still trickles down to this day to where it's impacting not only Native American communities, but all communities are impacted by the laws that were created to disenfranchise Native American tribal nations. And oops, I said but back to your question about these things and how we got started in the work of environmental advocacy is that, you know, I saw that there was a lack of people of color voices in these spaces in the environmental movement in the state of Colorado, to where, you know, a lot of these policies still impact our communities from being impacted environmentally. And laws like the Indian Removal Act like paved the way for industries and foreign investment into the lands that we know were historically over 574 tribal nations have these ancestral ties to the lands that are being resourced for natural gas and coal, uranium. You know, being from the background of the Navajo Nation, you know, my grandfather was his only choice was to work at the coal mine or the coal plant and to get certifications to work at that plant. And like Sharon has shared, you know, so many people have been taken by these industries and impacted environmentally, health-wise. That, you know, my grandfather suffered from asthma, which caused him into early retirement. He eventually died of possible leukemia. But you know, a lot of health services don't serve our communities as well and cover up for these industries that, you know, that don't take record of our people being environmentally harmed health-wise. So my work in the environmental sector in Colorado really pushed me to advocate for not only myself and my health, because I also have asthma. I was born premature, just like Sharon has shared, that women that are impacted and live in these environments are impacted in multiple ways. And many of us on the Navajo reservation, we don't even know that we have birth defects until we join the army or the military of some sort and get discharged because there's something missing from your organs or something that prevents you from being, you know, the soldier that they want. And you know, the work that I do really like was pushed by, you know, the EPA. They were working on a mining, an abandoned mines in southern Colorado that impacted the Navajo Nation's way of getting their clean water. Their water was basically contaminated by this abandoned mine, and it was an abandoned gold mine that was left there for many decades until the EPA decided to clean it up one day and caused this whole ruckus of communities not being able to drink the water or use the water. And there was a lot of stigma with the farmers in the regions that of the locals, like they didn't trust if the water was used for their crops or not. And people had a distrust with the local farmers. So that really got me activated to start taking, you know, initiative in my community on environment and public health, and sharing my story as an indigenous tribal member of the Navajo Nation, living off of living outside of my reservation territory, and living in Denver, Colorado, where I learned that there was many environmental harms that were harming the communities just north of where I lived. And then to the point of like immigration and housing, you know, a lot of us are fighting for housing and we're finding ourselves as people of color, people disenfranchised by income, being pushed into environmentally harmed communities where we're being located right next to Suncor refineries or the oil and gas refinery and many other industries, into where our communities are really placed right next to industrial zoning areas where some communities, it looks like an island surrounded by industries that are harming our water. They're legally allowed to dump benzene waste in safe dilution matters into our waterways, as well as the toxic waste that they're able to also um, dilute inside safe matters into the waterways. And these, to me, are like very medieval type of policies that we are allowing into our communities and has not been addressed, because this is the disenfranchisement of Native Americans, being unable to, re-collaborate as communities in their ancestral areas. And my, in Colorado, there's over 48 tribal nations that have ancestral ties to the land, now known as the state of Colorado. Today, there's over 2,000 tribal affiliated members from different diverse tribal nations that live in the state of Colorado now. And our challenge right now is really being heard by the government and not having to go through the Bureau of Indian Affairs just to get a response from political leaders in our state that this continues to be the disenfranchisement in our communities. And like the migration of immigrants is really the wave of climate change is pushing our communities. And migration has been around for centuries and decades, to where communities move based on climate change. As Navajo people of the Four Corners region of the Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, and Utah, they've always migrated according to seasons, because they always recognized that there was 4 seasons in the area. So they migrated according to seasons. So going to higher grounds during the during the warmer seasons, and going to lower grounds for the winter. And a lot of that it wasn't respected by settlers or colonizers or the U.S. government, that when they moved forth with the Indian Removal Act, we were simply ignored of our rights as Indigenous people. And today we're still seeing those impacts in our communities that have allowed these industries to be right next to us. So in short answer of your question, I think it's a quick no, that we shouldn't be considering natural gas as sustainability, because it's finite. It doesn't reproduce itself like solar or wind, or our natural energy as humans that we give off repeatedly throughout our lifetime, because we all have a lifespan. And that's the other thing too about when we think about technology, we want things to last for forever, which is in truth not the real reality. Things don't last forever. And what we've done in Colorado too is support the just transition for coal workers, where the state worked with the workers that worked in the industry of coal, were able to transition to energy jobs of solar and wind. And today that still is valuable for that industry. But what we're having the problem with is, like, when things are defined as a just transition, it was mainly for coal workers and not natural gas or oil and gas workers, that we really need to encourage the involvement of community and those that are disproportionately in the community members that are disproportionately impacted by the environmental harms. We lack the solutions from our own communities, because we are in a world where we invite leaders, scientists, and political leaders to be at the table, and not our community members and not our labor workers that work in these fields. But the managers were invited, the CEOs were invited for some of these things. We really need to encourage for the involvement of community members and labor workers and those that have been disenfranchised for such a long time. And right now we're seeing an uprise in funding for for new creativity in our communities, which is like the second leading dollars in the economy right now, above industry, above extraction. It creates more funding than any other industry. It's creativity and culture brings money to our communities, not the other way around. And we need to support our community members to branch out and utilize these funds to work the lands, and so that we can eat off the lands again, so that we can drink from the rivers again. We need to change our policies in a way that respects our health and our future generations. Because just like like Jackie, the speaker, like we not only want to survive but thrive in these communities to where we're seeing our ancestors being respected for the knowledge that they passed down and were able to keep. Because as a Native American indigenous identity, our community leaders were sought out and seeked out for extermination through the Indian Removal Act. If we so our community leaders, our historians of our communities were eliminated a long time ago, to where we're having to relearn our own history as Indigenous people. We have to relearn how our ancestors survived without technology. And technology, there's still very like Indigenous knowledge, technology that exists, and we need to do everything we can to protect what we have now. And that goes not only for Indigenous knowledge, but for what we have left of the land. And we really need to invest in working with the land rather than extracting from it. So as a mother, and it's really important for me to pave a path for the next generations, not only for my kids, but for their kids and their future families that go beyond us. And it really touched me to join Moms Clean Air Force when I went to my first protest that moms had held in Colorado on fracking. Fracking was just making its way in Colorado when I first started. Well, it wasn't first, but people started hearing more about fracking and the detrimental impacts on health and environment, especially that methane is a very powerful component, a contributor to climate change, in that it warms the planet within a 20-year span, versus our politicians and policymakers are going off of a 100-year frame of climate change right now, that we're trying to get them to listen about that methane is a 20-year span contributor, and it's still very long lasting once you incorporate methane into the community and air unnaturally, because naturally methane was already being emitted into our environment at very low increments. But now that we're driving a stake into the, this is like a balloon. It's not like it's not just slightly seeping out. It's like when you hit the balloon and all of it escapes. That's what we're seeing with natural gas, methane. So in the long answer, yes, we have to work with natural gas for the short term, because we know tomorrow we're not gonna see the industry go away. We're not gonna see the natural gas, not being able to utilize it. It's going to take our communities to be involved in these just transition solutions. We need to hear the ideas and solutions from our community members, our resourceful farmers that were able to figure out how to run a machine without gas for a little bit. There's so many knowledge keepers that we forget to invite them to the table. And that starts with the community and our labor workers that work in these fields, that what are their ideas about moving forward without this industry, and for the betterment of public health and environment, and for the future generations. And to me, I think it really takes on like educational level, because as Native Americans, we were stripped of our knowledge through the educational process of being placed in boarding schools so that we would be indoctrinated into a safe mindset by, religious groups. And, the government signed off on that. And right now we got to refix those wrongs in a way that, respects our children's education and respects the next generations of how they will thrive and survive in the world that we let them inherit. So I think that is, that's really what it's about. And it's based on each communities, because each community, we work differently, we operate differently, and we're sustained by different things. So it'll take each community to really be involved in the just transition, that we need our leaders to really listen to communities, tribal governments and communities, not just tribal governments, but tribal communities and leaders that are actually doing the action on the ground, working towards solutions. Like the Navajo Nation, a lot of them have taken action over trying to convince the tribal government or trying to convince the president that they're taking action now by facilitating, solar power and different, there's different knowledge that we have in our communities that, we could be uplifting them to take initiative and take opportunities to the, the grant investments right now that are being shared among the, through the EPA environmental justice programs. I've heard there's a lot of prioritizing in Black and Brown and Indigenous communities and leaders and organizations to start, start taking opportunity and seeking out and applying for those EPA grants right now, because we need as many solutions out there that's being worked for our communities and really like pushing the needle for change for climate action.
Thank you, Shaina. I think the other one should work. Okay, good. No, we can give like you have now the working microphone. Great, Vernon, thank you for joining us. You're of course you're in a very different part of the country. It's a different setting, but still you're working also on similar issues or similar questions at least. But I want to hear a little bit how it's different where you are in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and also, of course, where you see maybe also connecting points to some of the challenges that have been mentioned. And then, of course, my really a question on my mind is like how you're doing this. You're an organizer, you're in an NGO, but then now you want to go into politics and carry this to the other side, basically, or crossing that line, and how to maintain your your being true to yourself while going into politics, and also then being part of the decision processes that are so important for enabling a just transition.
All right. Well, before I begin, I want to thank the organizers for organizing such an extraordinary conference. Really glad to be here, to see so many bright faces here from different walks and the walks of life in different spaces and places. So really glad to be here. In fact, I'm elephant happy and hippopotamus glad to be here with you all, talking about a very critical issue, which is environmental justice, and also talking about communities that are disproportionately harmed by by climate change. So a bit about my background. I wasn't always in the environmental movement, and how I got involved in the environmental movement is I read the UN report in 2018. I read it in the fall of 2018 that said that we have 12 years to slow down our our reliance on fossil fuels, or the global temperature will go up over 1.5 degrees Celsius, which will impoverish millions of people and will bring the likely occurrence that we see many more situations like what happened in New Orleans in 2005 with Hurricane Katrina. So for me, that was the seminal moment of how I began to get involved in the environmental movement. And it was from there on that I began to look to get into the environmental field. And I started with an organization called the Communities Responding to Extreme Weather. So I was the director of that organization, and essentially what we did was we were focused on underserved communities, Dorchester, Mattapan, Brockton, the South End. And if those communities aren't familiar with you, the common characteristic or the commonality between all the communities is that they all suffer from the urban heat island effect. So essentially, those communities are a lot hotter, and they become a lot hotter because of the lack of green space and trees, etc. And essentially, we know that environmental justice communities are communities that have historically been redlined and disenfranchised. So I'm grateful for the work that Sister Sharon is doing, that she talked about the work earlier, and also what my co-panelists are doing, and trying to raise this issue for communities that have been disproportionately harmed. We know that the climate crisis is not a single special interest issue alone, but it is rather multifaceted, and it is complex, and it impacts jobs, labor economy, food, healthcare, etc. So I think that while we focus on trying to reduce the environmental harms that communities are experiencing, and we know that the whole world, and we know that climate change is the greatest existential threat to our human existence, we also should prepare. And I'm going to bring, we also should prepare for extreme heat and flooding. And I'm going to tie that into a little bit later, why I decided to run for city council in Cambridge, Massachusetts. But essentially, we know that if we don't prepare for extreme weather now, it's going to become more costly later down the line. And essentially, how do we prepare? Well, it's not only just individual preparation, but it's also community preparation. Some of you may remember in 1995, there was a heat wave in Chicago that killed 739 people in 5 days. And this was atrocious. In Philadelphia, my hometown, I was born and raised in West Philadelphia. That's where I spent most of my young days, not on the playgrounds though. Any rate, 130 people died in Philadelphia in 1993 because of a heat wave. So what happened in Chicago is outrageous, and it's been many deaths. A couple years ago, hundreds of people died in the Pacific Northwest because of extreme heat. But there was a study done in Chicago that said that folks that were likely to die because of the heat wave were those that were socially isolated and socially disconnected, and they were most vulnerable to dying. So essentially, I think one of the things that we as a society should work on is how do we see our interconnectedness? And I think that once we're able to focus in on our interconnectedness, then we can forge a strong, robust movement that will push against the fossil fuel industry and push against those who are profiting off the destruction of our community. And that won't happen through osmosis, but it really will happen when folks of goodwill, folks of moral conscience, Black folks, white folks, all kinds of folks get together and say, well, enough is enough, and we're not going to stand idly by. It was interesting what happened in 2020 with George Floyd, the unfortunate murder of George Floyd. It was a strange time because we were dealing with the COVID and we were dealing with the pandemic, and the vaccine wasn't out yet. But what happened with Floyd's murder is millions of people began to mobilize and say that Black lives do matter, and this is an injustice and an atrocity how Floyd was killed in Minneapolis. This same intentionality and this same fervor will be needed to tackle the climate crisis. It won't only happen, it won't happen with activist movement on the ground alone. It will also happen when we have elected officials who are connected to the community that will advocate and bring marginalized voices to policymaking to create systemic and radical change. Then this systemic change will happen. And we know that local politics matters, national politics obviously matters, statewide politics matter. And essentially, what we're dealing with in Cambridge, very rich city, Harvard, MIT, city budget is almost $1 billion, but yet and still, we have a housing crisis. We have over 20,000 people that are on the housing wait list, and 6,000 either live or work in Cambridge. And we know that there's an intersection between the housing crisis and the climate crisis. As was mentioned earlier, and I talked about a bit ago, is what we saw with Hurricane Katrina is we saw people lose their homes and they become climate refugees. And as extreme weather is expected to increase more, we know that more folks are going to lose their homes because of flooding and because of homes being devastated because of hurricanes and tornadoes. And we know that the relationship between stronger hurricanes and climate change is real. As the temperature is warming up, these hurricanes are becoming supercharged. And then when they're hitting land, they are leaving not only a trail of tears, but a trail of devastation because of picking up so much strength, moving over warming oceans. So a bit about my job at Clean Water Action. So I'm the Climate Justice Director in Massachusetts of Clean Water Action. And some of the work that I do focuses on creating more clean air. I'll talk about one of the bills that we're advocating for in the State House. One of the bills that we're advocating for is to install more air quality monitors into environmental justice communities across the state. So I have the privilege of working with a collection of organizations known as the Environmental Justice Table. And we're working, and we just had a hearing a couple weeks ago in the State House, and folks testified, physicians testified, advocates testified, elected officials testified, etc., that this bill, the air quality monitoring, will allow ultra fine particulate matter to be picked up, because we know that communities of color are suffering more from asthma. And in fact, growing up in West Philly, before I ever became aware and cognizant of the climate crisis, I saw friends who were suffering from asthma, but I never connected it to the climate crisis. And I grew up in a predominantly Black community, grew up in an underserved community, not too far from where the University of Penn is, maybe about 10 or 15 minutes or so. And it wasn't until I began to unpack environmental justice and unpack the climate crisis that, not what happened in Philadelphia on 46 and Marcoux, this is the street I grew up on, is also happening in Chicago, also happening in Houston, also happening in New York, etc. So for me, it makes sense that we have local elected officials, and also in 2020 I ran to become a Democratic State Committee member, which I did get elected. I'm part of the Democratic State Committee in Massachusetts, and essentially I think we need bold leadership and more bold leadership that will tackle the climate crisis, but not in a silo, but will suggest policy solutions to tackle the climate crisis, along with housing crisis and the racial justice crisis. Some of you may have not heard, but about 10 months ago, a young man was killed. Faisal was killed in Cambridge. And our police force does not have a body camera, and the reports came out last month to justify that the police killing, because this person had a mental health crisis. It jumped out of a window. They said he had a long knife, and he was coming at the police with a knife almost the size of a machete, and they tried to hit him with a rubber bullet. They shot him with a rubber bullet, but it didn't stop him, and then he ended up fatally dying because of 6 shots that were shot at him. He was hit 6 times. So we know that this also magnifies the historic distrust that communities of color have. And he was Bangladeshi, I believe. We also know that this highlights the historic distrust that communities of color have with police. But essentially, politics matters. Who we vote for on the local level also matters. And for me, what inspired me to run is, as I began to know more and more folks in the city of Cambridge, I often hear that folks are tired of the lack of transparency, that City Hall is displaying. So I think we're going to make our process more transparent, more equitable, more inclusive, that we need folks who have the pulse of the community, understand the concerns of the community, to bring those to policy making and bring those decisions and bring those marginalized voices to the table. There's a famous quote that those who are closest to the pain should be closest to the power. But that doesn't happen in osmosis. That doesn't happen through happenstance, but that comes with great intentionality and with folks who will put themselves on the line and say, yes, we have these issues and we will no longer sit idly by. And essentially, Cambridge, progressive city, I mentioned that we do have a housing crisis. Black and brown folks feel left out. Those are some of the reasons. I have some other reasons too, in terms of equitable representation. But related to this particular conference, I think, again, we all come from different spaces and places, but our common theme is that the air is polluted. Fossil fuel folks are profiting off the destruction of our communities, the poisoning of our water, and the polluting of our air. And I think we should figure out how we can work together across state lines, across geographical lines, across national lines, because as Dr. King said, and I'll leave it here, and then I know we want to transition into our Q&A. Dr. King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. But he also said that we're all tied in an inescapable garment of mutuality. What affects one directly affects us all indirectly. And I think if we have that mindset, then we will start to care about the child that's suffering from asthma in Dorchester, as well as we care about the child that's suffering from asthma in West Philly, as well as we care about the child that's suffering from asthma on the south side of Chicago, et cetera, because we see that we're inextricably linked, and these fights for justice are inextricably linked. And I think if people of goodwill can see that the climate crisis is not a special single interest issue alone, but is multifaceted and complex, and it's related to housing, indigenous rights, human rights, LGBTQ rights, etc., then we can forge this great movement that challenges the structural inequalities in our society and challenge those who are pushing a narrative that climate change is not real, that the housing crisis is not real. And we know that these are real because I know for me, I talk to folks every day who feel the housing crisis, who feel the climate justice crisis, etc.